Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Women Making History. We're talking about women of the past, present, and future, and maybe on the spiritual, ghostly side. Who knows? Because today we're talking about witchy women. And I know that song has been stuck in my head for a week now, knowing that we were going to do this podcast. After our panel here, our discussion, we're going to have a segment with Judy Carnia, who is a travel writer and talks about her visit to Salem and going a little bit beyond the witch history of Salem. But right now, we have some amazing guests on our show. Some of them are travel writers, some are authors, and a genealogist. So you may have a witch in your history. Who knows? So first, let's bring Jo Clark on. She is a travel writer and photographer. You know her on her Second Sunday podcast with us. Jo goes everywhere she does, and often with a glass of wine in her hand. You can go to cheers, haveglasswilltravel.com and recipiestravelculture.com. So welcome back, Jo. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great. I had yoga this morning. Now this afternoon, I'm drinking witching hour wine and talking about witches.
This is good. This is good. So Jo is out in South Carolina. So I know in a little bit you're going to tell us about a South Carolina witch.
I am.
Ooh, there, we like that.
Not one of our ghosts, but our one and only witch.
I do like your hat that comes in and out. Like it's kind of like someone's moving things on your head. It's really cool. So for those of you not watching this and just listening, all I know is I have to tell you, you're missing out on Matt's new beard and witch hats from Barbara and Jo. Just saying. But anyway, let's get to Barbara. Barbara Redding is a travel writer and author, and you can keep up with her at barbararedding.com. She is calling in from Austin, Texas. How are you, Barbara?
I'm good. I'm good. Interested to talk about witches. I was in Europe, in Germany, and a town called Osnabrück, which has some very interesting witches' tales that I hope to share with you today.
Oh, we're looking forward to that. And, I know it's going to get into what happened to women, basically, because we know not all of them were really witches, right? So we're going to get into that a little bit. But I don't know. Matt Costa is back here. Matt is an award-winning author of multiple books that revolve around mystery and history. And you can go to his website, mattcost.net. And if I didn't give it to you, Barbara's is barbararedding.com. Pretty easy. All the links are in the episode notes as always. And Matt is also the king of happy hour on our happy hour show. So welcome back, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing pretty fantastic. Happy to be here.
Good. You're the only guy on here. So you might have, I'm just saying, you might need to get some extra super special
Maybe
powers.
he's a warlock and doesn't want to announce it until later in the show.
I feel like this is a warlock beard.
It is. It is. We're going to give you that. So today, are you going to tell us about a witch in any of your books?
I'm actually going to focus on the voodoo queen,
Ooh.
Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans, who is a witchy woman who was very intelligent. So that's what I'll probably be the main focus of my topic, because she plays a big part in my historical fiction book, Love in a Time of Hate.
Ooh. And I love that you're going to do that, because now the song has gone from Witchy Woman to Dr. John singing Seasons of the Witch, Donovan's, but he does it far better than Donovan. I didn't say it, but he does a good job of it. But Katie is back on the show. Kathleen Walls, who's an author, also a travel writer. I know she's all about Marie Laveau, but Katie, I think you also just came back from Kansas, where you did go to the Wizard of Oz Museum. So you got to meet up with some fictional witches.
Got a couple of witches. And of course, growing up in New Orleans, Marie Laveau was the one I knew. And she technically wasn't really a witch. She was just a very smart Black woman, free woman, who managed to use her hairdressing abilities. People would think no one was paying attention, and she'd learned a lot. And she did have some powers. She was a very interesting person. And of course, the Wizard of Oz Museum is a fantastic place to visit. And then there's another less known witch in Virginia Beach, the Witch of Pongo, who I'm going to talk about.
So the South is doing good. Europe is doing good. And we've got Aaron Youngless, who is a genealogist. And Erin has just done a really good blog on witches in your ancestry and how to navigate that. I don't know. It's like there's an look for cauldron pots. No, I'm kidding. But but Katie's website again, I want to make sure you got it, is americanroads.net and also katiewalls.com. That's Katie with a Y for her books. And Erin is Genealogy by Erin, and that's Aryn. So welcome back, Erin. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing good. So getting into witches and ancestry. Is this mostly going to be witches that were not real witches, and what was going on? Because you go into witches of Connecticut, even not just Salem, Massachusetts, which is very famous, but I
Yeah,
didn't
there
know
was a
Connecticut
massive
had
witch.
a.
Yeah, there was a big panic, witch trials in Connecticut, and the first woman who was hung for witch trial for being a witch was Alice Young, and that was well before Salem,
Oh,
many years.
so do you think she sparked off the Salem witches? Because that wasn't.
Well, I think that it came over from England. So
Oh.
New England, all the traditions from England came over because, well, it's one side of this is that we never burned anybody in the United States because England didn't burn witches. That's like a French start moving out. But actually in London, and at this time after King James came in, they no longer burned witches, but they would dunk them and they would torture them and then they would hang them.
So
But
what's
there
with the Isle of Man? Well, that because that's still under England. Why
It
were we
depends
burned?
on what time period, because you were saying the 1400s, so that's a very transitionary time, and you could have had that Celtic influence still, and the Celts came from Germany, and then you have,
Mm.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, because we also have Viking stuff going on.
Yes,
Dang, man, we got some weird history, man. You've got to just all the genealogy you do. You must sit there going, man, humans are weird. Like we do some weird stuff.
it's
We
the
do.
it's by far the most fun way to learn about history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you're going down all kinds of rabbit holes. Is that what
Hmm.
it's like every day?
It
Like,
is, it
yeah,
is, and
in
I
witchy
always
ones.
warn clients if you don't hear from me, just get a hold of me because I may have found something in your family history, and I'm like, what is this? I've never heard of this before.
That is so cool. So I want to go over to Barbara because Barbara, that is this going to be the witch history you're talking about going to be, is that going to be before the English burning of witches or dunking? What was going, because you went to Germany and Poland, right?
Right. And it was in Osnabrück, which is kind of in northwestern Germany, where I heard the witch's story. I think there were specific cities that had a lot more witch activity, but a lot of what was going on then had to do with the Reformation, the issues between the Catholics and the at that time Lutherans or Protestants, and so I think there were some accusations being thrown around at women of you know the different groups who were accused of witchcraft. But they actually, when I was researching this town, there were actually two men that were accused of being witches, and they were also and in Germany they burned you at the stake. But one of the things I thought was interesting was and I guess this was true other places, was the water torture or basically they threw witches in the water, in some type of water, and if they sank, they were guilty, and if they floated, they weren't. So, but if you sank and you died, then it really didn't matter whether you were guilty or not; you were still dead. But they
Goodness.
imprisoned women, and today there is this alley that they call, I'm looking it up, the Hexa something. And it was where they would parade the women through this very narrow alley to the center of the town, which is where they would then be burned at the stake. So there's the tours and tour groups that's actually a part of what you get to see and do in Osnabrück as they talk about the witches. I guess I was familiar with the US and what was happening in England but I hadn't really ever heard much about what was happening in Germany. And apparently it was probably pretty widespread. And some other speakers may know more about that than I do. But it was just kind of an interesting side note to my travels and learning about the history of some of these kind of smaller, lesser known cities in Germany.
when we lived in England, I remember even in school books they would talk about nagging, like they would dunk women in these
Mhm.
like it was like almost like this wooden crane, and you'd get dunked in this really cold water. So if you nagged your husband, the husband would go dunk her, you know. And I'm like, this is some messed up stuff, you know. And I'm like, hello. So I mean, I think it's kind of sounds like in back in the day, we sorry, Matt, but men, you're gonna get nailed on the show. You didn't do it though. I know you didn't. But and Matt is a you know history teacher too, so you can jump in on this. But it seems like we as women got put into places like you're a witch if your husband just didn't like how you're behaving or whatever, and you could be a witch if you said something out of turn. And then later, once we got past witchery stuff, we got put into insane asylums. I'm just going back to our last women's show. So it seems that we've made this progression, and now who knows? You just go to jail or something. I don't know. But Erin, have you seen that in when you look at the history of women and witches and insane asylums and all of that?
About control.
Yeah, is it really that kind of thing where you know that it's kind of progressed, it seems like. I mean, this is just me talking. I don't
No,
know.
no, I've seen things like that. And yeah, it just depends on the society and the patriarchy and how it is in those areas. But women do tend to take the brunt of
Mm,
issues. Like if something goes wrong, they need to blame someone, let's blame a woman
mm,
because it's not going to upset the social class because they're not the ones in charge. If they go,
mm.
then the problem's gone.
But then you get turn around, you got someone like Boudica or Boudicca, everybody pronounces it different, and you don't want to mess with her, she'll chop your head off. So like it's kind of on we have the other side of the women could be like a force of nature that you don't want to mess with her. We're not having this, and there's women rulers through history too. So Matt, have you has come across any of that research as a history teacher, you know, former teacher, and then also in the writing that you do about going from being put as a witch or into an insane asylum?
As a teacher, I get most of my history from Monty Python. And King Arthur would say, I believe, is what burns other than wood? A witch. And so that is why they would throw the witches in the water, according to King Arthur and Monty Python.
Oh,
And in that movie, they weighed the witch to see if it weighed the same as a duck, because both witches and ducks float in the water. So that's most of my expertise on that.
and that's why we have hair care products. You know, hopefully they're not flammable. Back in the 80s, that could have been interesting.
But
So,
regarding insane asylums, that is a very real thing in history that, husbands would throw their wives into these insane asylums. And I do write about that in City Gone Askew, Damnation Island, or Welfare Island, and the East River off of New York was a place such as that where many women were sent. That was actually the place where Nellie Bly in the 1890s
mhm.
exposed it for the cruelties and horrible things that were going on there by going undercover for 2 to 3 weeks, I believe it was, into this horrible conditions of Damnation Island.
Damnation Island. That's what Erin was talking about last month was Nellie Bly and the Girl Reporters, which is super cool to have, you know, these women that went out and did things. But back in the day, I don't think they were doing that, right? When we were witches, if you were bad, you know. So Erin, any tips for people? I'm going to link to your blog for people doing genealogical research to finding your relatives if they were burned or dunked and killed. Do they have like death reports or death
Probably
certificates
not.
of these women?
No, because you would have been associated with the devil. So in
Wow.
early America, everything was very Puritan and religious based. So I very much doubt you'd be able to find a death certificate. But even then, even if you weren't a witch, I really doubt you'd be able to find a death certificate or anything like that for a female. But court records, because this is all going to be
Okay.
written down. So even if they weren't accused, if they were testified, you may be able to find your ancestors in female ancestors in these court records because you had to there were trials, and then people did testify for or against you, and there were notes taken. Salem has an incredible collection of well, the handwriting, you have to get a little used to it. But there's all this information about who was living there when, and you can get a sense of the area. You can maybe learn about your ancestor. You may know they're from that area, but their information's not coming up. But using court records, you can still learn about the area, who was in town, neighbors, to give you an idea of your family. Yeah.
Wow. And so when you think about it, so it goes from like Germany, Poland, what Barbara was talking about, to England, then it starts to come over here. But then if we go, Matt, over to you with Marie Laveau. So, she wasn't born here, was she? Or was her family born here? Because she's now voodoo. So that's coming African roots, right? Or Caribbean roots, Creole
Yeah,
roots? What's going on?
No, she was
was
born
either
in New Orleans.
Go ahead, Matt.
she her mother came over from Haiti when she was young, and Marie was born in New Orleans, I believe, right, Katie?
Right.
Sometimes it's disputed that maybe she came over as a very young baby, but
Yeah.
basically she was born in New Orleans. She grew
And
up,
even her birth date is, they're not positive. They say between 1794 and 1801. And then there's this legends that she had some sort of mysterious birth, but she was the child of her enslaving. Her father was her master, her mother's master, and her mother was a enslaved woman. She was a freed woman.
Okay.
which was often the case in New Orleans under, I forget the terminology for it, but if your father was carrying on an affair with a woman that was a slave, the child that was born free. And that was very unique to New
Oh.
Orleans because that wasn't true anywhere else
Yeah,
in the
not
country.
always. They freed her, but that didn't happen all the time. They had the place arrangements at
Right,
the quadroon balls, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. The Bourbon Orleans Hotel was once the scene of the
right.
quadroon balls.
And the French, that was the case with the French. I mean, I guess the English did not do that.
Yeah, the
Um,
French were a lot
so
more lenient with the enslaved people than the English were.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, but it's interesting when you think about it, because even going up to Natchitoches, which is older than New Orleans, it was the first settlement. Um, there's the Melrose Plantation. If you go there, it was a woman who eventually took it over, and she it's that I'm not even going to delve into it on this show, but look up the Melrose Plantation, because she ended up freeing all of her kids and ended up being a very rich woman and created an artist colony. Like folk artist Clementine Hunter came out of there, and she was a slave
Mhm.
on the property. And but anyway, that's just an interesting story, because it was also very unique, like you're talking about, Matt, for these kind of, the freedom part of it. But how did she get into being a voodoo queen, which
Well,
is cool?
she actually grew up and all her life was a strong Catholic. So, and the voodoo is really just taking uh, the African religions and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
infused with the Haitian religions and trying to understand it through the religions that are happening here in the US. So it's an interpretation, and it's really a blend of African gods
Mm-hmm.
and Catholic gods. And so she,
Wow.
on a Sunday, would go, to Catholic church in the morning, and then in the afternoon, she'd be up to Congo Square, uh, or out to Lake Pontchartrain doing voodoo rituals and things like that. One of the really cool things I always thought about, you know, and I think Katie mentioned it already. She began as a hairdresser, and then
Mhm.
as she became more affluent, she had a string of hairdressers that she would send out into these wealthy women's homes to gather, not just to cut their hair, but to gather the gossip. And
Yeah.
because they would talk in front of the hairdresser like they were, not even there, and share anything they wanted. And then later on, she even opened a brothel, and she had prostitutes, because on the other side of things, men would share things with women that they were sleeping with. And so bedside manner. So this is a way that she really gathered information, was through hairdressers in her brothel, to know what was going on in the city. And
Wow.
she would use that to her advantage. Just a simple example of something she might do is, uh, husband might come in and say, "Hey, my wife won't sleep with me anymore." And, she would give him, some chance to do some red dust to, put on his doorstep, these different voodoo rituals. And then she would suggest that he maybe take a bath a little more often. So
Yes, please.
there was a pragmatic side to her, infused with, the voodoo rituals.
That's funny. That's funny. But running the brothel, it's interesting because the CIA did that when they were giving people acid without them knowing. They were doing it mostly through brothels in San Francisco, and then watching what was happening as people would trip out. And I mean, Charles Manson was part of that, I do believe. He got acid from the CIA. There's like anyway, that's a whole other story. They were watching through the brothels what was going on or something. That is so that's gets more into the Creole history in Africa. There's the Sangoma and Tokoloshi is mostly like in the Zululand area. The Sangoma is the witch, and the Tokoloshi is the devil kind of thing. And so we had dogs, twin dogs called Sangoma and Tokoloshi, but and one really was the devil. But it's interesting the witchcraft that goes on, male and female, in Africa. It is kind of it's about the power. It's like a mindset. It's a power of belief. It's we've seen so many interesting things happen, and I encourage people, if you can, to look up there was a TV series, not the movie. Do not do the movie. Do not do that. I mean, do it if you want to waste time. But there's a series called Shaka Zulu that was on in the 80s, and the witches that guided Shaka, who I think is one of the most incredible warriors of time. He knew how to corral the British in and just annihilate them. And I mean, it was amazing what he did. But this movie shows the witchcraft of how, you know, warriors and people would go to shaman, basically, as you'd say here, maybe, but to the witch doctors. And there would be men mostly, but there were also the women. And there's this maternal thing where they were more of a seer than the male. And I encourage people to watch that because you'll kind of get that feel of African witchcraftery, because it's really about they're almost like politicians and doctors in one, and a psychological concept as well in there. A little bit of a shrink, doc, and politician all in one.
And
So
that's what Marie Laveau was. That's a
see,
great
yeah, that,
definition of what she was.
yeah, and they would tell you we yeah, that's all. I want to get to the female witches, but we've seen like different things happen where I remember when we were in South Africa, we got to South Africa, and a friend had something stolen out of his work, like a locker or something. And they called in a witch doctor to talk to everybody in this workplace, and said, and Nancy was there, and they said, like, if you drink this, you'll be fine. But if you stole this goods, you are going to be sick, and you're going to need to eat chicken feet and chicken heads. And that's what they do: chicken feet, chicken heads, if you're sick. And that's good for your stomach if you're there. Well, just about everybody got sick, even if you were the one. And like Nancy's been through one of this too, where they say drink this, and if you start to is eating a piece of bread, if you start to choke, you're the guilty one. And she's like, you're guilty whether or not you're guilty. You already start to feel like you're going to choke just because of that mention, which I think is pretty interesting. The way the witchcraft, that psychological power, which goes in towards our next show with Matt, which is about cults. But anyway, goes into that a little bit. So yeah, I love all these different regions coming together. So let's go to you, Katie, because you did. Yeah, we'll get into the Wizard of Oz and everything, but tell us a little bit about the other which you wanted to talk about.
Oh, the Witch of Pongo. There, I had just discovered that in Virginia Beach, and it's she was not killed. She was tried, and she was dunked. You were talking about the dunking, and uh, she managed to get herself untied and come to the surface. But the reason she was brought in and tried as a witch, she was about 40 something at that time, and people, her neighbors would complain. She practiced herbal medicine, and her neighbors would complain about things and say that she was causing their livestock to die and her crops were damaging. And finally, it was in 1706, this man, her neighbor Lou Call, he formally accused her, and that's when she was brought into court. And the courts couldn't decide, so finally then they said they would do the ducking. And they took her out into the water, tied her hands, and threw her into the water. And she managed to get untied and came up and saved herself, but then they put her in jail for 7 years uh, because she was a witch and she floated upward. And the information about that, there's a lady, Belinda Nash, who she's passed away since, has a whole book written about that one. And that the
Wow.
fairy, I think it's a fairy house mansion there. There's a lot of information on her.
Mm. Wow. Wow.
And she
Now
managed
let's
to live, she spent 7 years in jail. And
mm,
the fairy house, that the building there today was where the courthouse was, where she was tried
hmm. Wow,
on
it's
there.
fascinating to me because she gets out of it. It's kind of like Houdini, right? And isn't it weird that
Mhm.
Houdini died on Halloween? Like that's creepy weird.
Yes,
I think he did it on
that
purpose.
um the Halloween thing. My the man Charles Gandolfo that founded the Historic Voodoo Museum was my ex-brother-in-law. My brother was married to his sister at one time, and he was expert. In fact, he wrote a book on Marie Laveau, and he
Mm,
was the one I got an awful lot of my information from. And he passed away on a Mardi Gras day, which probably would have been the day he wanted to go. He was that type of
that's
person.
wow,
The
that's amazing.
interesting thing about Marie Laveau, again, another thing, is that people thought she never aged, but the theory is that as she got older, her daughter, who was also named Marie Laveau, took over the practice, and people would think, oh, she's not aging, but it really was her daughter doing the
Mm,
practice. And
mm,
there's legends, all sorts of legends. In fact, she's in my Host with Ghost book, that she appears not only at her home on St. Anne Street, but the cathedral, because as Matt said, she was both voodoo and Catholicism came about when people were enslaved in Africa or Haiti and brought here. They were automatically forced to become Catholic. They had no choice. And what they did was merge their own religion, culture. Interesting, their chief god is Dambella, the snake god, which is almost the opposite of Christianity, but so much of it is similar,
mm.
other than
Well, it's the
Dambella.
same as what happened
And
to Native Americans. Cut your hair
yeah,
off and put
and
you in.
well, she was baptized in the St. Louis Cathedral, married in St. Louis Cathedral. She had several husbands, but she was
Mm,
married at least once in St. Louis Cathedral. And the
wow.
theory is also that her ghost is seen in the cathedral.
Mm.
I
I
can't
want to go
vouch for
over
that
to
one.
South Carolina now. Joe, tell us about your South Carolina witch. It's the
Well,
season of the witch, baby.
it is. And maybe that's who we should be blaming for these last couple of hurricanes.
Don't
They
you
blame.
be putting any
Oh,
feminine
hey,
energy on it,
Yes,
even though it's Helene.
no,
the
Helene,
witches
that's
did
what she
it.
was blamed with. Mary Engelman, she was accused of like Katie was saying, that one making cattle sick. Mary was accused of causing cattle to die, of causing
wow,
natural disasters like hurricanes and flood.
wow.
She shape shifted into animals. And there were three others who were also accused about this at the same time at this trial at uh, south of Winnsboro. There was a plantation apparently called Winnsboro.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I can't find my note on that. Winnerboro, Winnerboro, and they tried four people So Mary was one, and then the other three were practicing hypnosis and other unusual rituals. And this was all in 1792. So this was about 100 years after the witch trials in Salem that we were trying witches in South Carolina. And they were found guilty. And the punishment, the others were flogged and other forms of torture, but I think she was flogged, and then they took the soles of their feet and held it to a wood fire and burned the soles off their feet as their punishment.
Wow.
And
that's not nice.
No, it wasn't. That would have just killed me. I would have had a heart attack and died right there. My feet are pretty tender. I couldn't have taken it. But they say that her spirit still haunts the Winnsboro courthouse, and I don't blame her. And the townspeople were just desperate for answers to these unexplained events, and they feared a repeat of the hysteria in Salem. So they were pretty quick to blame Engelman and her friends that they had caused all these things to happen.
Wow.
And the accused were not allowed to offer a defense. That the only evidence presented was firsthand accounts from alleged victims.
Wow. The soles of the feet are interesting in South Africa. I actually don't know if it was South Africa, Kenya, or where we got it, but it's definitely from when we lived there. There's a saying that, if you're mad at someone, it's like, don't say that again or I'll kill you, and eat your feet. Ooh. And the eating of your feet means, like, in other words, your feet, it's prized because you're going to walk to heaven when you die. So if you say something about the feet, the sole of your feet, no heaven. So that's where that saying kind of comes from. So that's an interesting thing to go back to you, Erin. Are there sayings that when you do research like that kind of thing that you can?
Well, I've got one I want to throw in there, and she can comment on that too, because there's a saying about holding your feet to the fire to make you confess something or tell the truth.
That means you're never
I'm going to hold your feet to the fire.
Yeah. Ooh, crispy toes. That's how we got Cheetos. No, anyway. but Erin, any of those kind of sayings, do they help you know an era or a region? That kind of.
I haven't seen any sayings like that. I mean, outside of like Bridget Cleary's nursery rhyme about fairies and her husband, I haven't seen anything like that. Well, I'm sure there's some with Salem too, because they were young girls that were making the accusation. So,
yeah. What about you, Matt? Have you seen any sayings that help you in regions and when you do your research?
Nothing that jumps off the top of my head. No real saying that directs me in any way or anything like that. So no.
Okay. All right, cool. So wow, we went around the world of witches. All right, so let's talk about witches in, pop culture. Is there a movie, music, a book that you guys all like? And I know Kathleen has been over to Kansas at the Museum of the Wizard of Oz Museum. So you get to do you get to do Somewhere Over the Rainbow in the Wizard of Oz. So what was that like, seeing all the witches?
It's a really nice little museum, and the whole town sort of looks like it could fit into it. It's a little bitty town of Wamaco, Kansas. Okay. And when you go in the museum, they have, first thing you see almost is life-size images of Dorothy standing there with Toto. And as you go through it, and they have all sorts of artifacts from the movies, the books. They've been translated into so many languages. They have the dress that Diana Ross wore when she redid The Wiz. I mean, because it's been redone so much. There's some interactive museums there also. There's the murals. Cindy Martin was the lady who painted the murals, and she's very, very good. She does beautiful work on them.
That's cool that you can't go there, because I didn't even know there was a museum.
You don't think of Kansas as being a great tourist destination, but surprisingly, I've loved everything I've seen in Kansas. It's been
Mm,
amazing.
that's cool. Well, you got to go there while you can before anything floats off, like
Yep.
flying houses and tornadoes and stuff. Barbara, for you, do you have any witchy movies, books, any fun stuff that resonates with you that you enjoy?
I think it would have to be The Wizard of Oz. I think those were, that was a show that I saw at a young age. It made a big impression on me. The Wicked Witch versus the Good Witch, and I think that's
Yeah.
one of the resounding stories about witches, the bad ones and the good ones, and trying, in some ways, I think of women in general trying to, kind of figure out I am the good witch or the bad witch, or certain characteristics or things that you do you think of as bad, you're being the bad witch, or good being the good witch. So I think that witches for women from a very young age very kind of symbolic in some positive ways and in some negative ways. And I do
Mm.
remember that it was a very popular costume, and I think men in
Mm.
particularly can react pretty negatively to witches, where I think women tend to embrace even the good and the bad witches together. So,
And then there's
for
the whole
me,
sex symbol of a witch too.
yes, exactly. So I think that witches and women are very tightly wound and connected, in part probably for the terrible history of them being killed, etc. But then, again, it's always a battle between good and evil, and I think the witch is a perfect example of
Mm.
kind of two sides of that story.
And then you think about the black cats with the witches with the black cats, right? So it's kind of
Mhm.
that's an interesting connection with that, especially this year. I'm just saying. It's just a whole new thing of what's going on there. Joe, for you, is there any, kind of pop culture symbolic witch in your life?
Well, I mean, Samantha, of course,
Oh, yes.
Right,
from
yeah.
Bewitched. When we got our
Mhm.
first GPS and plugged it up years and years ago, and she told you where to turn, we named her Samantha. I said, there has to be
Mhm.
a witch in that box. So, of course, it was Samantha. But,
Wow.
there's practical magic. That movie was great.
I've been to the town where it was filmed. It's
Neat.
Coopersville in Washington State, near Whidbey and Camano Islands.
Ooh,
And
cool.
Coopersville, it's just idyllic. I mean, it's just so those islands are beautiful in Washington State, and that's where you can go out and go kayaking and see orcas. And yeah, no, it's gorgeous up there. Yeah, Coopersville, or is it Cooperstown? It's COU. Now I'm going to get it wrong, but it's beautiful up there. I totally encourage people to get out there. But Whidbey Camano Islands, you can go Whidbey Camano Islands, I believe, and you'll find it. So, what about you, Erin? Do you have a pop culture witch?
How about Sabrina the Teenage Witch?
Ah, she's going to
I
be
like the TV
Sabrina.
version. It was a fun departure of Archie back in the day and gave you that character who maybe wasn't just the Veronica or Betty. So, and then bringing in the whole witchcraft and watching the evolution of it all the way up to the Netflix show.
Mm.
Ooh, and the
I
Witches of Eastwick.
Oh,
Don't
that's a
forget
good
ooh.
that
one.
one.
That was
That's
going
a
to
Mm-hmm.
be the one I was going to share.
Oh yeah, The
Okay.
Witches of Eastwick. Is that yours? Okay, we'll get it. Yeah, was that a book first or a movie? Just a
I,
movie.
I believe it was a book first, but I was trying to remember the author and I cannot. So
Okay, The Witches of Eastwick. That's a good one. And I mean, that's the thing. The movies with witches in there. I got like an award for being a witch from Macbeth because
Oh,
double double
yes.
toil and trouble. Yes.
You were
So we
just
got
that good.
mm, yes, I did Macbeth multiple times in my career as a student in school, kids school, and because we moved so much that Macbeth was always on. Like we went to another town or country, and it's like, here you're doing Macbeth again. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to become a witch. So why not? Why not? And you got to think also like King Arthur in that there were always witches in King Arthur, in you know back in those eras, I want to bring back that Celtic part, like Aaron, what you were saying. I mean, it's that was part of life. It's like a pagan side of it,
It
right? So
is. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So if you've got pagan roots, how do you
We
find
all have
that?
pagan roots.
I
We were,
believe that
I
too.
mean,
Yeah.
Christianity is only 2,000 years old. We all have pagan roots. How you would learn about that, you just see how far you can go back. It really depends on the area and what records are available to you.
Mm,
That's pretty far back. So
mm,
being able to locate records and information when you get 3, 4, 500 years, it becomes more and more difficult because things
mm,
disappear, floods, wars. There's lots of reasons
mm.
why things go missing. But if
I
you
was
could,
thinking,
you could do
yeah.
your DNA and see what regions you're from.
Oh yeah, we're gonna still do it. I promise. Here's the thing too. Here's the thing. I was thinking about that with, all the hurricanes lately in places devastated in people's homes. And it dawned on me like how important it is to document things online, you know.
It's important to have multiple information in multiple places.
Yeah.
So it's important you can have it online, but what if
Yeah, new
ancestry
knows.
goes down? What if family, I mean, it's on a computer,
It
it's at a
that
database somewhere. So having it on an external hard drive and having it in paper and have like just having multiple copies because things go missing. People
mm,
throw it out. I have piles of pictures right behind me here that I bought because I just couldn't handle the fact that someone was going to throw them in a dump. But the family didn't want them anymore.
mm. And there might be a witch lurking in there.
Maybe.
I know. I like all that. Well, thank you all so much for a fun, quick chat about witches. You know, we're all good women. We're all good witches. So we're going to move on. We're all going to move on to talking with Judy Carnia. But everyone, again, keep up with Joe. She's here every second Sunday, at 7. You can go to haveglasswilltravel.com and recipestravelculture.com. Keep up with Katie. Go to americanroads.net for her travel stories and katiewalls.com for her books. Matt, you've got a whole bunch happening. Pardon? What was
Picked up
Um,
that?
an echo. It was you.
um,
Oh,
It was the ghost of
yes,
Lisa.
it was the Witch of Lisa.
it was Sangoma. I'm a
I, I,
Sangoma.
I will just add that I looked it up and cheated, and it was a John Updike book,
Oh,
Oh,
it
The
Okay.
was,
Witches
huh?
of Eastwick. So before Jack
Oh,
Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer and Cher, there was a John Updike book. So that was exciting.
yeah, he's good, man. He's one of the top. So everyone, mattcost.net, barbararedding.com. Keep up with her travels. Where's next for you, Barbara?
I'm staying home. I've been gone a lot and I'm gonna park
Yeah,
until Thanksgiving anyway.
oh, well, and then, yeah, then we can all wear turkey feathers. That's, be witches as we
Right,
come out.
right.
Everyone, keep up with Erin. Go to genealogybyaaron.com. Thank you all so much. It's been fun. Now let's all get
It's
witchy with
always
it.
fun.
Thanks.
Okay.
hi.
Bye bye.
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 So we're going to continue our witchy talk with Judy Carnia, and you can go to her website, judycarnia.com. That's Carnia with a K, not Carnitas, like she is in Scottsdale, so I have to bring that up with a C. But anyway, the link is in the episode notes, as is her article about going to Salem, Massachusetts. So when we talk about witches in this country, Salem is probably the top thing, right? And you went there
Right.
and you kind of went like, I want to see that, but I'm going to go see the other things. But let's go there. The Salem witches. Is
Hmm.
was that a draw for you? You in your article you kind of said not my main
Not
thing.
really. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and they do have a lot of, there's some cool witch museums, and like the dungeon, where they kept people who were accused of being witches. And I did a tour. I mean, there's a bunch of different tour companies, like walking tours. And so
Mm-hmm.
you go at night and they tell you all the scary stories. And
Oh yeah.
it's really cool. I did one that was witches and vampires.
Ooh.
And it's nice. I actually was there just to visit a friend, but I just love the town. It's such a neat
So it's
old
like a town,
old
like not
East
like a
Coast.
city.
Yeah, it's a town. It's got a nice little common
Mm,
that, like a grassy area. A lot of people walking their dogs, stuff like that. And then there's
nice.
the kind of the main shopping strip, Essex Street. That's pedestrian. It's a pedestrian street. And that's where all the shops are. So there's lots of shops where you can get all sorts of like magic and witch and stuff like that, as well as other types of
Yeah.
like just the shopping places. So that's neat to just wander.
So there's a lot of witchery stuff, right? So that they're
Definitely.
celebrating witches, but at the same
Yeah.
time, these girls were accused of something that they
Mhm.
weren't. And so that's something in history um, that we need to look at because it's actually kind of, you can do the fun stuff, but this was not a
Yeah.
cool thing.
Yeah, they basically had to prove they weren't witches. How do you prove you're not a witch? Because
Mm,
people being accused and some people, were trying to get out of it themselves, so they accuse somebody else. And
mm.
then, they got arrested and they were put on trial. And yeah, how are you supposed to prove you're not a witch? It wasn't like somebody had to prove they were witches or they
And
were,
women weren't
yeah,
even considered real entities at that point either.
right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really horrible. Like it's, some were killed, but most of them, even just if they were just put in prison, that's what
Mm,
I went, they have a museum where you see the dungeons where they kept the people or like the torture devices. And, there were just like rats and bugs. And it was just underground. You have a little tiny cell. And sometimes,
mm.
like there was one woman who had her baby with her in there, and
No.
yeah, so it was, even if they didn't
Mm,
actually kill them, it just what they put these people through was
mm.
horrific. And you think like, how could that even happen? But it's just
I
like
think
this
everybody thought they
hysteria.
were killed. I think there's a lot of rumors of them being killed, like, but that didn't happen. It was, and
Yeah.
they weren't witches. It was like they ate something, right? So it was kind of like they had a psychotic episode, basically, right? Wasn't it like off rye bread or something, something
Yeah,
like
I,
that?
I think most of them like didn't even have anything. It was just people accusing each other because there
Wow.
was some sort of, enmity about something
Town
else.
gossip
And
drama,
yeah, it was, and just, I think kind of like a small town
hysteria.
history, right? People are just really afraid. And yeah, but it was
Wow.
a very short period of time. And so it's like Salem, it seems like their whole, persona is the Salem witch trials. And, it's just a tiny fraction of their actual history, because it's a great little town.
Yes, it's
So
like
much
there's
other
all this
things
cool stuff.
too.
There's
Yeah.
more than this. So they had this
Right.
episode of people freaking out,
Mm-hmm.
women being in trouble over it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A couple men too, actually.
Oh,
Were,
warlocks got
yeah.
involved. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So we got women, we got
Mhm.
men. It's like, hey, we can just use this as a new weapon, basically.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. You just need one judge to, buy into it and,
Mm.
sentence people to prison.
Wow. It kind of sounds like our politics of today.
It is. It's a
In a
little
weird
scary.
way, right? It's a little
Yeah.
scary.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
saying a little witchery going on. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it is like you think about how humans just the Lord of the Flies, the I
Right.
always think about that. It's kind of like we go in this weird way. So it's a reminder, but the town itself,
Mm-hmm.
reading your article sounds actually when I want to say the word delightful.
Yes, it is.
Witchy but
It's a
delightful.
great, great town with the old brick buildings and the
Oh,
cobblestone streets and things
oh, I
like
love
that.
cobblestone.
And you have the whole waterfront. There's a fabulous art museum. The Peabody
Ooh.
Essex Museum is a fabulous art museum. They do have an exhibit. I'm not sure if it's still running, but they were definitely doing one that was about the witch trials. But all different art types of art. There's a house that they brought from China. I can never remember the exact name, but it's they basically dismantled this house and reformed
Wow.
it at the museum, and you can go into it. And it's
Oh, cool.
really, Yeah, so that's really neat. So you have to get tickets for that. And they have a couple other historic homes related to the museum that you can go tour. So that itself is, it's
And just it looks like
impressive
from
for
your
this.
photos and your article, gardens are a big thing
Hmm.
too. Flower power. It
Yeah.
seems like the area has flower power to me from your
Hmm.
photos and your article. I was like, ooh, this looks pretty. You know?
It is. Yeah, and there's so many historic homes. Like you walk down the street and you just see plaques on like every house that says,
Oh,
when they were built, all and who they were built for sometimes.
wow.
And like from the early 1800s, and I think some from the late 18th century even. So it just
Wow.
reminds you about the history of our country, like that these
Mm.
things have been there for so
That's
long.
it's ancient. I mean, because you're in the Southwest now, right? So when
Yeah.
we look at our history, I always go because we were in
Yes.
the Southwest in California. And I remember, when we got to Connecticut and we pet sat in a house in Connecticut that was
Mhm.
the farm of um, Benjamin Franklin's great niece. And it
Wow.
was from the 1700s. And the cauldrons were
Right.
there, the original
Uh-huh.
fireplaces. And I'm like
Right.
pinching myself the entire time, going, this is insanely cool history. This, I
Hmm.
mean, they had a new
Yeah.
side of the house and this side, and it was like we're actually on this farm. And I'm like, this,
Right.
you can't get past this. Like in
Yeah.
the Southwest, it's indigenous history that we have.
Right. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That
But any
that's
buildings are, modern.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Not
amazing.
anything are old, but yeah. Yeah. It's pretty.
Did you think any of them were haunted?
I I don't believe in it, but there's
Because yeah,
definitely.
you're on the science side. You're a vet.
Yeah,
You're on
I
the science
am.
side.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but there's definitely a lot of stories, people who, have seen things or felt things. So that's why, doing one of those tours, it was really interesting to
Yeah, that
see
oh,
what
you used the word
people.
interesting.
Mhm, yeah.
I
It
love
is.
this. I love this.
Yeah, and
Well,
you hear
because
the stories, like why do people think there's a ghost? The story behind the ghost is very
Mhm.
interesting.
And
So,
then all of a sudden everybody smells the same thing or feels the same thing at the same time.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, you just suddenly
Yep.
feel a cold touch or something. Yeah.
Yep. No,
So,
I've had some experiences. So I'm kind of on the middle road because into science and I don't know. It's kind of like I think that we just have to keep learning. Let's put it that way.
yeah.
You
Yeah, well,
know?
have an energy. And
Hmm.
does that linger? Who knows?
Well, I mean, you're a vet,
Yeah.
so they
Mhm.
always talk about the 72-hour window of passing. Did you ever find that with animals that they had that 72-hour motion changeover or no?
I don't think so. Yeah, I'm not really
Oh,
familiar with that.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay, it's different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. So everyone go to Salem, go learn about the witches. They weren't bad women, you know.
Right. Not at
I
all. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
this happened to us apparently, and obviously in the first part of the show we deal with that. So, but everyone, I've got the link to Judy's article. So thanks so much, Judy. It's so cool to hear from you, and
You're
looking forward
welcome.
to more travels. Where are you going next, by the way?
I'm
Are
going
you
back to Portugal.
what? You just been like? Have
I
you even been to home? Like, what's
Yeah,
going
not
on?
much. Not much. But yeah, I just got back from Vermont for a few weeks and now I'm going to I want to go see what it's like not in the summer. Because
Oh,
everything, like when the big
oh.
tourist season, I've only been there like in June and August. And so I'm going in November to see, what Portugal is like, in the off season and in the other parts of the year. So
And are you going for port too? Because we just had a podcast conversation today about port, and I almost fell off my chair just like crying because I want some really good port.
yeah, I'm not really into port, but there's a lot of good wine
Mm,
in Portugal. Yeah.
mm. I am into
You
port
think
like I am into port now, like lately. Like a friend
Mhm.
brought us some,
Yeah.
and I've had port, but this port, I don't know. It just kind of hit everything that you ever like, every
Hmm.
happy
Yeah.
bump in your body. It made you
Uh-huh.
happy.
Uh-huh.
And we had it with brownies,
Yeah.
so maybe that's what it
Nice.
was. Like
Yeah.
the
That could be.
combination of dark
Yeah.
chocolate and port made
Yeah.
everything feel really good. My
Right.
body was happy. So
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
really
I
like
want to
their
go to
Vino
Portugal for
Verde,
that.
the
Oh,
green wine.
What?
Yeah, it's called Vino Verde. It's got a little bit of a sparkling element to it. It's just on a nice day. It's
What? They have
refreshing.
wine, green. This sounds witchy.
Yeah. It's really good. Yeah.
It's witchy. So if you're drinking it, I'm just saying.
Mhm.
All
Right.
right. Well, get on your broom. Let's go.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.